Hello everyone, in this episode of Motive Garage presented by Sparesbox, it is another RB26 inlet manifold analysis and test. Now, if you're a regular viewer of our channel, you would have seen our OEM versus Nismo RB26 intake collector video, and I will be perfectly honest, I was very surprised at how good the Nismo inlet was. I was expecting it to be more about low down and mid-range torque, but it had more low down and more top end, and a very well designed and very well thought out inlet collector for the RB26. Massively impressed with what it did, and most people out there actually thought that I'd be, well, myth busting that manifold and telling the world how not good it is and how much Nismo tax is on it. But I think I may have increased the price of those Nismo collectors after that video. Now, we also put the call out of what else would you like to see tested? And obviously, I think we had an answer for every single brand out there. Now, we will be doing a single versus 6 throttle test later, but we wanted to test at least one more 6 throttle inlet. Now, on the market at the moment, there is a few sheet metal style ones. You've got Plasmaman, Hypertune, GReddy's new one. HKS have their own very individual design that's quite a lot smaller and a different shape. And then you've got this, the old school GReddy inlet. Now, we've decided that basically due to time constraints, budget constraints, we can't go fitting up every inlet, and we don't want to cause arguments between various partners we work with. So the sheet metal one we've selected is the Hypertune 6 throttle inlet, which is we're going on the car and being tested. But the GReddy one, well, you can't buy this one anymore. From what I'm aware, it's discontinued. So we're going to take a look and analyze it, but we're not even going to bother putting it onto the car, and you'll see why very shortly. We've already covered how good the Nismo one is versus stock. We still have a stock inlet here with us to compare. So first up, let's analyze the GReddy inlet manifold for RB26. So the first thing that's very obvious when you compare the factory inlet and the GReddy inlet is just the physical size of the thing. We filled them up with water after sealing them up, and we know the factory one is 3.8 litres in capacity. The GReddy one, about 6.2 litres in capacity. You know, getting up there close towards double the capacity. And you can just see the physical side, it is massive. The other thing with the GReddy one is it's two-piece. You can see here they've cast the bottom section, you have an O-ring seal with these bolts holding it in, and the outer section as well. I guess I was told by someone that one good thing about that is if you want to get in there and you want to port it or weld your own bell mouths in or modify it in any way, two-piece design does make it a bit easier. Some people say it's a little bit easier to fit in the car as well because of that. But yeah, the main difference is that physical size. But let's look at some more important stuff. Obviously, the runner inside, both 44 mil, but unlike the Nismo one, the GReddy one isn't ported inside, so it still has that rough casting, same as factory. It's probably a little bit better than factory, but honestly, pretty much the same as the factory one, so it isn't smoother inside. Also, if you look in the front of the GReddy one, there are no bell mouths. So one of the biggest things I said about the Nismo was having the bell mouth on each runner and having a smooth transition of airflow and then all being ported out and smooth. So smoother, better flow on the Nismo one. While the GReddy, honestly, no better than factory. Really, the only thing it does better than factory is it's bigger to help air get better distribution towards the cylinders. And as you can see, factory, you've got that last runner is a lot longer, and where the merge is blends into number 5, while the GReddy one, you can see from looking at it, you've got better spacing on the runners, they're all equal length, and inside you can see a lot better distribution of air into each cylinder. Let's take a look at the length now of the runners so you can get a bit of an idea of the difference there. Now, because there's no bell mouth inside the GReddy or the factory inlet, it's very difficult to kind of give an exact length of each runner. So we have to be a little bit approximate with that because it's hard to know exactly where to go to inside, because where it tapers on one side is a little bit different to another side, etc., and a little bit different between the cylinders. But overall, if you look at the factory one, we did discuss this in the last video, and that is that the first runner is, you know, you're talking about 65, 67 millimeters. Second one's actually a little bit shorter to the same point at about 60, about 60, about 60, about 60. But then the last one, where it joins up, you're talking closer to 90 millimeters. So there's the front and the back one are different lengths to the others. And obviously we talked about the turbulence caused by having 5 and 6 kind of merge close together. You go to the GReddy one now, and if you kind of measure in a similar spot, so you're talking about 50 millimeters, probably a little bit less, probably 46, 47 millimeters in length. And they're all pretty even. So the length of the runner on the GReddy one is shorter. You're talking about 46 millimeters. What does a shorter runner do? Well, if it was a naturally aspirated car, a shorter runner would suit high RPM better. And the fact that there's no bell mouths on this means that the way it's controlling the airflow and the airflow velocity in that sort of off boost transient response area means the GReddy one honestly would have probably no benefit over the factory manifold at low RPM and mid-range. It's all top end. And when you look at all of their marketing material and all their tests that they did 20 years ago, it was all about making more power on big horsepower cars. So something that makes 940 might make 980 by putting this manifold on. So the short runner, the big volume is all about top end power when it comes to the GReddy Inlet. So honestly, that's the reason why we're not going to bother fitting it and testing it, because all the experience we have in the past we've seen with this inlet is it is all about top end power. So if you have 1,000 horsepower turbo and you want to look old school JDM in your engine bay, this is the go. But our setup right now with 800 horsepower, 3.2, super responsive for its setup means we'd probably just go backwards with this. We probably wouldn't lose any outright power, but hey, we might at this power level, just due to the fact there's no bell mouth, the inlet isn't smooth, so I just can't see how this is going to give us any benefit on the power level that we're on. So now let's take a look at the Hypertune one. So looking at the Hypertune 6 throttle inlet. These are available in a few different options based on whether you're going to use a factory style intercooler pipe or whether you've moved to the battery tray. So you can select what inlet into the inlet manifold you want. The other option they have is you can get 44 or 48 millimeter runners to suit whether you've got normal throttle bodies or enlarged throttle bodies. At the moment, we are 44 mil, which is factory. Even though we're port matched to the head, we will be switching to larger throttle bodies in another test later on the big turbo. But the first thing you notice when you look at this is it's beautiful. It's exactly what you expect from Hypertune. The fabrication, the design and everything, it looks excellent. There's no wonder that people love putting this stuff in their engine bay, because it is just pure engine bay bling. But looking at the design, you can see it is a fair bit bigger than factory as well. We measured this one at a tad over 6 litres. So ever so slightly smaller volume than the GReddy one, but a lot bigger than the factory or Nismo one by a couple of litres. What does that mean? Well, technically this is part of the intercooler piping system. It's all pre-throttle body. So you only need to fill it up as you're coming onto boost or if you drop off boost between gear changes. So this sort of change in volume is kind of like having 2.5 inch piping instead of 2 inch piping in your intercooler. It's a little bit more to fill up. Will you notice it? Some cars not so much. Some cars you will a little bit. But obviously the extra volume means you can get better distribution of air to each of the cylinders, which is what's important with the aftermarket inlet. Look inside and obviously bell mouths on every single runner. Perfectly formed and shaped bell mouths. Will that help with low down torque and low down drivability? Maybe. Will it help with flow up top? It should. But the big difference on this inlet versus standard or Nismo is the length of the inlet runners. You can see they are very short. If we get out the verniers, 25 millimeters in length. So the length of the runner on this inlet manifold is very short. What does that tell you on paper? It tells you that it's designed for top end power. So large volume, short runners means top end power, but hopefully the bell mouth will help with the airflow velocity down low and try and improve down there as well. But let's be honest, there's only one way to find out, and that is to put it on the car, get it on the dyno and take it for a drive. If you want my personal prediction based on what I can see in front of me and analysing the inlet, I think that it will be able to match the Nismo inlet for power. Will it match the low down drivability? I think we'll probably lose a little bit due to that runner length, but I don't think it'll be enough to probably be an issue with how this car drives. But if you had a 2.6 litre engine, yeah, maybe not so much. But the biggest thing we're looking for is, can it make more top end power than factory? And does it have better cylinder feel? In other words, have we got even EGTs? Have we got better injector trims? And is it better to tune than the factory one? And my prediction is it will be. So let's get it on, head over to CRD and find out. Well, off camera, our Hypertune 6 throttle inlet has now been installed. Now, we did say in our Nismo comparison video that it was a bit of a pain in the butt to install. However, this one, well, take that to the next level. The Nismo item is bolt-on. So once it's actually in the car, which is the difficult part, getting into the clearance issues and the brake booster and the brake master, etc. But once it's physically on, it bolts up to everything factory. The idle stepper motor, the brake booster line, all the throttle stuff bolts straight on. And most importantly, the intercooler pipe is in the exact same spot as factory. So if you have a car that's perfectly running, everything's fabricated, you're doing everything with it, a Nismo one is a bolt-on item. The Hypertune is not. I'll run through why. Now, it comes with a different set of studs from Hypertune, so when you fit it, you can physically bolt it onto, obviously, the inlet runner pieces and the throttle plates. Relatively straightforward, no more difficult than the Nismo one to physically get on there. Where it isn't bolt-on is in two areas. One, you can't use the factory metal line from underneath to go to the brake booster, and all of the silicon or rubber hoses you have from all the idle stepper motor and stuff just simply don't go on. They don't even come out in the right spot for where the fittings are welded onto the bottom of the inlet. So you've got to go make your own custom lines underneath. You've got to get some fittings to go into the inlet manifold. It's not a difficult thing. It's just obviously adding more time, labor, and parts to putting that inlet manifold on the car. The other thing that's difficult is where it bolts up to the factory intercooler pipe, it simply doesn't. The inlet into the collector is in a totally different spot. It's like 70 millimeters further forward than the factory one. So you need to custom make an intercooler pipe. Now, custom making an intercooler pipe itself isn't really that difficult. However, when you have an engine bay that already has a catch can and a radiator in it and everything's already done, you're restricted by how much space you have. So it was a very tight fit to get our intercooler pipe from the factory position out from under the battery and up into the inlet manifold. We had Roger from Mobile Custom Fab do that pipe for us, but we actually have to remove the radiator hose to get it in and out. So it is a very tight squeeze in there. Now, on the flip side of me saying all this, it does bolt on perfectly to the head itself. It's a beautiful piece of artwork. The throttles bolt on, etc. There's just custom fab work to get it to fit. And if you're not prepared for that, you'll realize that the cost of the manifold ends up being higher by the time you buy all those bits and pieces that you need. But on the flip side of that, if you're building a car from scratch, like a lot of people buying these products are, and you're custom fabricating everything around it, so you've got your engine, you put on your new manifold and turbo, you put your inlet on, put it in the car, then do the fab work, well then it's a lot more straightforward because you get to custom make everything to suit it. So it's a bit of a catch-22 on how you go about it. If you're putting it into a running car, it's a lot more work. If you're putting it into a fresh build, it's relatively straightforward. But overall, the thing looks fantastic. So from here, we get over to Croydon, see what it does on the dyno. Let's go. So the results are in on the Hypertune 6 throttle versus stock inlet manifold 6 throttle. And some of my predictions are true and some not so true. My initial prediction was that it would lose some bottom end response, and that's just due to having a shorter runner and a larger inlet manifold volume. It's double factory basically, and you can see that in the results. Starting boost is very close to the same, but you can see it's a little bit lazier onto boost as it comes on. Now, we haven't lost any pressure drop between the two setups, so there's no difference there. Just a little bit lazier to get on, and obviously that reflects in the power and torque curve. So you're kind of losing 10, 15 kilowatts. There's probably one spot where it's 20 kilowatts down low, and obviously there's a reduction in torque as well, as you can see through that curve. Once boost is sort of settled in and you're sort of getting up towards peak torque, they get a lot closer together to the point where, you know, a couple of Newton meters of torque difference up top, not a huge amount in it, maybe 5 Newton meters, but the Hypertune's a little bit lower. Now that could just be down to, it's a different day, different conditions. We can't do them back to back. It takes too long to fit it in a day. So is there a massive difference in air density? 97.1 versus 96.9, so fractional, but cars can be temperamental, a little bit different each day. So the peak torque figure, not really that different, and as you keep revving, here's where it changes from my prediction. We haven't made any more peak power. I thought we'd lose bottom end, pick up top end, and that would be a nice trade-off, especially in a car with a sequential where you spend all your time at high RPM as you're racing. But why is the big question? Well, at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not the collector's bigger, the runners are shorter, or it has a bell mouth, it still goes to the same 6 throttles. They're 44mm, the factory ones, and they're all the same size as what they were before. So no matter what's bigger pre-throttle body, you've still got, from the throttle body to the engine, is still the same size. So is that now a limiting factor? Yes and no. They're not a limiting factor for making power, but they're probably a limiting factor on whether or not the collector makes as much difference as you thought it would. No doubt you'll go back and watch our Nismo comparison to stock and kind of see what happened there. But the way I see it is, if you make less than 1,000 horsepower, stock and Nismo are obviously fantastic. Do you switch to a Hypertune 6 throttle at this sort of power level with a medium frame turbo? Well, looking at this, there's probably no need to. But there are some benefits. Looks amazing. And secondly, we did have more consistent EGTs and obviously cylinder trim for injectors. Like the Nismo, it had pretty much perfect EGTs across the board, especially compared to factory. So it does have its benefits for tuning, and obviously looks fantastic, makes for a much cleaner and nicer engine bay. But in terms of power, we had the bottom end loss that I predicted, but we didn't get any top end gain. And like I said, if this car made 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 horsepower and was going to a larger throttle body, well, that's when this whole design would probably come into its own. And that's the whole point of these tests. It's not about what works and what doesn't as an overall yes or no black and white decision. It's about how does your setup work the best. If you have a medium frame turbo, the collector that you use will be different to whether you have a large frame turbo or low mounts, etc. So it's about picking the right inlet, the right turbo, and the right capacity to work together. And that's the whole point of these tests. That's the thing out there. Some people want their car to look awesome, and they're not as concerned about this sort of stuff, while other people purely just care about performance. So it's your decision to make on what you want to do, but we do actually want to test this inlet manifold again once we have the G45 on, using enlarged throttle bodies, and hopefully this inlet manifold will come into its own for really what it's designed for. Because speaking to the guys from Hypertune, their attitude is this: they tell everyone their big inlet manifolds aren't designed for 800 horsepower cars. They're designed for stuff that makes well over 1,000. So at what point do you switch? Well, it's up to you guys. But for us, the data doesn't lie.